Kinnock, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Secretary of State and Mr. Robbins. We've talked quite a lot about the Chequers deal, and the Chair referred to the interview that Mr. Barnier gave to the Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung. Secretary of State, you've described that as he was grumbling about certain bits of it. I think was the quote that you gave, and also that it's not the first time the UK and the EU have disagreed about something in terms of a negotiation. So the implication is you think that Mr. Barnier is just sabre rattling, really, and that this is a negotiation ploy. But I'm also a member of the Select Committee on Exiting the EU, and we went to meet with Mr. Barnier on Monday. And I can tell you absolutely, unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt, that Chequers is dead in the water. Mr. Barnier made it crystal clear that Chequers is completely unacceptable to the European Union. And he gave two reasons for that. At the heart of the Chequers proposals is obviously the facilitated customs arrangement and the rule books. And on the FCA, he said very clearly that it is unthinkable that the EU would delegate responsibility for collecting tariffs in the way that Dr. Whitford was interrogating earlier to a third country. It's not going to happen. And on the point of the rule book, he made it absolutely clear that 20 to 40% of the value of goods that are traded is in services in the modern economy with integrated supply chains. And so it would be unthinkable to potentially allow British businesses to have unfair competition if they are signed up to a common rule book in goods, but not in services. So what I just really did want to underline is I think your starting point needs to shift, and it needs to become that Chequers is dead in the water. Could you then outline what a plan B might be?
So first of all, I think it's great that the Select Committee went out there. Of course, in a negotiation, one side will try and resist certain aspects of it that they are uncomfortable with. I'm not sure why we would take it as read that means it's, in your words, Mr. Kinnock, dead in the water. And equally, I think you need to be more clear about the extent to which MPs in this House will quite naturally be used as a pressure exercise on the government. What we're clear about is that we've come up with, yes, an innovative and ambitious set of proposals, but ones that involve compromise on our side. And so, of course, we'll expect to see some compromise on the EU side. Now, just in relation to the goods services distinction, I'm going to ask Ollie to chip in here. I'm pretty sure that's a distinction that in relation to the EU's approach in other areas, actually they do follow or accept. But correct me if I'm wrong.
If I may, Mr. Kinnock,
Sure.
I would just like to supplement what the Secretary of State has said. And we're not accusing Mr. Barnier of sabre rattling. We're in a deep conversation with him about the proposals we've put forward, and he's advancing challenges and criticisms of those, and you'd expect that. So to tackle a couple of the ones that you've mentioned, the issue on the UK taking responsibility for the customs border to some extent on behalf of the European Union. This is, of course, exactly what the Commission has proposed in its protocol to the withdrawal agreement in respect of Northern Ireland. And so the question we are trying to tease out with the Commission is what is so very different about the arrangement that they have put forward in that context that is so impossible in the context that you described. And I think, as the Secretary of State mentioned earlier, there are other examples, for instance, in Turkey, where that's been deemed to be both legally and operationally doable. So the question is, what is the reassurance that both parties need that can work effectively? The goods and services debate, as the Secretary of State has said, I think is in danger of becoming a bit confused. There are two issues that are raised here, if you don't mind me continuing for a second. One is about the extent to which, when a good is sold across the border, it comes these days often with a package of services, particularly complex, high-value goods. And how is it possible to regulate the good in such a way as it moves freely, but the, for instance, maintenance package or the financing package is not regulated in the same way? I think we have had a good discussion about that with the Commission, and I think the Commission would accept that That is, the answer to that question is in how the EU chooses to regulate services in the future. There is no requirement for services to be regulated at the border. If the lift or the engine comes with a maintenance package and they want in future to regulate that maintenance package in a particular way, they will have the autonomy to do that, and it will be up to us to decide whether we want to do it in a similar way or a different way. The more complicated question, which I do respect but I think is being overblown, if I may say so, is about the extent to which, when that lift is sold across the border, some percentage of its value will have been the legal costs and the engineers' fees and the other services that went into the construction of the thing. Well, that's the case in CETA and in the EU-Japan trade deal and in every other trade deal that the EU is doing. So I am struggling to understand, honestly, why that is such a significant blockage to the proposition that we are putting forward.
Well, the point Mr. Barney made was that there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding on the British side of the way that the single market and the customs union work. And they are an ecosystem, is the word that he used. They are fundamentally and intrinsically linked. You cannot start to unpick regulatory alignment in the single market from the measures and acquis communautaire in terms of the customs union. So there seems to be a fundamental difference of opinion there about how the single market and the customs union actually work. We've got 42 days until the October summit. I don't know when you last had a conversation with Mr. Barnier, but I spoke with him on Monday, and he made it absolutely clear that this isn't going to work. So do you not think it would be responsible government to have a plan B in mind, assuming that we take Mr. Barnier at his word that this is dead in the water?
I think you're being drawn in too much to the pressure exercise that I described earlier. I think the EU is at its best.
A verbatim report of what he said.
Yeah, but in fairness, I've had 3 meetings with him in August alone. The last one for over half a day. I'm going back out this week, so I do understand firsthand what the EU's position is. Equally, he's made some very positive noises and remarks, most recently on the 27th of August, about wanting to offer Britain a partnership such as there has never been with any other third country. And I think that was interesting because it reflected a sense that we will do something innovative. And the EU can be innovative in the way that Ollie's described, and CETA was an example of it. And of course, whilst we are very assiduously, and I've made a point of stepping up the amount of time and the regularity with which I engage with him, precisely for the reasons you mentioned. But the EU is not either one individual or the Commission. It's if to use your words, the ecosystem as a whole. And from the Irish TSOC to the Latvian Foreign Minister to the Danish Finance Minister to the Polish Foreign Minister, we've had lots of positive feedback. But you're right to say, I think, that 2 things. First of all, that we are challenging some of the, if I can put it like that, the dry legal dogma that goes with some of aspects of the EU in some quarters. And secondly, I think beneath all of this, which in a way that you've actually faithfully conveyed, is there's a slight nervousness that the UK might rather do well and establish a competitive advantage on even the EU. And that ought to give people in this chamber and in the wider public a sense of confidence. But of course, it's something that the EU needs to be very mindful of. So what we're seeking to do is strive for an outcome which is good for them and good for us. We're not going to tie our hands from thriving when we leave the EU.
Just on the next sort of stage of that conversation, which was, he was then asked, well, given that Chequers is dead in the water, it seems that what you're saying to us is it's going to be some kind of CETA-based deal. And Barnier agreed with that. He basically said...
Can I just check? You said dead in the water. Are these your words or his?
It was all in French, so I can't give you the exact French solution. It will be all published. It was a public session, so I will be very happy to share.
I'm very happy to ask him whether he used the word dead in the water, but I just want to be clear whether it's your characterisation or whether you're saying he said it.
He said, les propositions sont mortes.
Okay.
Something like that. I don't think in the water was an Anglicism. But the key point is that he then said, well, we refer back to the models of the relationship that we think can work based on the British red lines. And if Chequers is not going to work from the EU's point of view, we go back to the red lines, then that leaves us with a CETA-based deal. But of course, it's CETA plus the backstop, as you've rightly pointed out. And CETA plus the backstop is not acceptable to the British government. So where does that leave us?
So first
if we based again on the fact that the clock is ticking, we have 42 days until the October summit, but in reality there will be a preparatory process which will kick in at least 3 weeks before that. So I don't know what your estimate is of what you need to have on track for the October summit. I estimated at about 25 days. What are we going to do if Chequers, you're not able to sell Chequers to the EU, CETA plus a backstop doesn't work for the British government? What is the plan B?
We've been very clear. First of all, we're not going to roll over just because there is some traction static on what we think is not just a good deal for the UK but a good deal for the EU. And equally, we've also made clear that if we don't see the ambition, the pragmatism, the energy that we are genuinely trying to bring to this negotiation to bridge the gap with our EU partners, then it's right to say we'll need to be prepared for the no-deal scenario. And that's why we've been patiently doing the work we have, both on the legislative front, the institutional front and the technical notices. But we are overridingly committed to the positive deal. We think our proposals set out a good framework. I don't accept the characterisation that you've put on it, Mr. Kinnock, but of course I'm not surprised in this negotiation there will be some pushback from either Michel Barnier or from other quarters of the Commission.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.